One of Pinellas County's pioneers was Wally Ericson, a legendary mariner of Tarpon Springs who built his own commercial fishing boats and helped shape the coastline of Pinellas County. He tells his story in his own words.
I was born in Tampa on Cypress Street, about a half-mile south of Tampa International Airport. We moved to Dunedin on the waterfront in 1935. My dad was born in Gothenburg, Sweden, and came over when he was 7 years old. And my mother was from Toccoa, Georgia.
Wally's dad was a boat builder and taught him the craft of boat building.
But he got into it some way, just started when he was a young fella. And started building, and of course I learned a lot from him over the years, helping him build boats, and he built quite a few. From the biggest he ever built was a 65-foot wooden boat, and he never built a steel boat or a fiberglass boat, strictly wood, because he died in 1966.
Boat building came naturally to Wally as he turned his hobby into a career.
I don't really know. I just got into it and kept doing it. And it was my hobby as well as my life's work, building them and running them. And I only built one for other people, and that was a friend of mine. And it was a 70-foot real seagoing, double-ended boat he built. He wanted a real seagoing grouper and snapper boat. And all the rest of the boats I built them basically for myself, and I'd use them for a while and sell them and build another one. And I'd figure out I wanted a little bit different boat, a faster boat or a bigger boat or something. I'd build me another one, use it a while and then sell it.
Wally built a wide variety of boats.
Basically all types, from planing boats to sailboats to real seagoing deep draft boats, displacement boats.
I asked Wally about how he goes about building a boat.
Well, it depends. Of course, you're going to lay the keel first, and you've got to decide what type boat you want before you do that, whether you want a planing boat or a displacement boat or a sailboat. And then you put up I always just put up the stern and the stem and the intermediate frames and bent some battens around and filled it in and went from there.
Where exactly did you build your boats?
Well, part of the wooden boats, most of them, I built at Dunedin on Spring Street and in the backyard down on the bay there, and we'd roll them down on some 6-inch pipes and roll them down at low tide and let them float off at high tide. The steel boats, I built all of them in Tarpon Springs, some on the south side of the river, some on the north side of the river.
What materials did you build your boats out of?
Yellow pine of the virgin type, the real good material, not the slash pine you get today, and pine that would last for many, many years. And the steel, of course, we'd buy the steel usually at the cheapest place we could buy it. And a lot of times it would be in the scrap yards, because they get full-length steel in there that the big companies sand in, you know. And I used a lot of tank plate, a lot of big tanks for the plating, because it doesn't rust like the modern steels, and but I use some of the modern steel too.
Wally created the foundation for many of the waterfront communities in Pinellas County through dredging.
The dredging, I had my own dredging business for about 15 years, and did a big part of the dredging that's been done between Clearwater and Port Richey. I put in the nearest fingered island, it's at Island Estates, the one next to the causeway where Ross Yacht was, or is, I don't know, and the big seafood restaurant there. I did that where the Bon Petit Hotel is, a motel in Dunedin, in the yacht basin, and then some where my parents lived, and then cut 3 of the canals there at Harborview, Villas, and Dunedin. Did the biggest part of what was done at Ozona Shores. Did dredging at Indian Bluff Island, and some at Gulf Harbors, and Sea Forest in Port Richey. And 1957, I dredged the channel going into Port Richey for the first time that it was ever dredged, and made it where boats could get in and out most any time. Before that, they couldn't. And then I went, when they put the moratorium on dredging in 1960, I sold out, and then I had a chance to go to work for Gehagen, so out of New York, which was one of the big 5 dredging outfits in the world. And I worked on Intercoastal from Tar Pond Springs all the way to Boca Ciega Bay. Every day, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, I was on duty. And for about a year and a half. And then I went back fishing. Then they called me and asked me if I'd come over to the Cape. They wanted to talk to me, so I went over, and they asked me if I'd...
And this was over Cape Canaveral?
Cape Canaveral, Cape Kennedy, they called it then. And they asked me if they thought the dredge job where they were going to build a polypad 39A could be done with a dredge, and I told them I didn't see why it couldn't. They said, well, the next question, if they took the job, would I go as field superintendent on it? And I said, I got to talk to my wife. He said, you got 30 minutes. She's in the car. Go talk to her. She said, you like challengers? So I went back and told him, okay, I'll take it. So we did that, about 26 million yards there in about 6 months. And then I did a job for the Air Force, and they put me as captain on the dredge when we were doing the Orsina Causeway. Now it's called NASA Causeway. If you go across to the Cape to see the missiles, you'll go across that causeway. I was captain on the dredge when we put that in. And then they had a job down at Peck Lake, just north of Palm Beach, and I told them before we started I was going to quit and go back home, build a boat and go back fishing. So we did that and finished that job, and I came home and built an 80-footer and started fishing again.
Wally caught a lot of fish in his time, from the coast of Maine to the waters off of Nicaragua.
Well, the different types I did, of course, I did grouper and snapper fishing. I did mackerel and king fishing.
Commercial.
Commercial.
This is all commercial.
Right. And a lot of shrimping. I scalloped from Apalachicola to Key West out in about 20, 25 fathoms for calico scallops. Also on the East Coast from Cape Canaveral up as far as Jacksonville. And that was calico scallops. Then running out of here, I worked all up off of George's Bank in the Gulf of Maine on Fipponese, Cassius Ledge, Cassius Bank, and all that up in there. And one time in a blow, I went into Rockland, Maine to get out of the blow. Sometimes we'd go through the Cape Cod Canal when we were going up or coming back. Sometimes if we were out on George's Bank, we just cut right across towards Cape Hatteras and come on down the coast.
Tell me about some of the storms you've been in.
Pardon?
Tell me about some of the storms and everything.
Some of them were bad. Some of them were bad. 1951, I had a 55-foot shrimper called a Trade Winds, a good boat. And we got hit by a rogue wave, and then we had our bow right into it, turned us over backwards, and busted the windows out and the doors out of the boat. And the boat righted itself and headed down the sea and had a big old Superior diesel. It never missed a lick. Those boats in those days would turn back over because we had wooden masts and a wooden boom and no outriggers because we pulled one trawl over the stern. Today's boats, if they go upside down with all that big rigging, they stay upside down. So we didn't have any trouble except wet and scared and some repair work to do on the boat. Nothing on the hull or anything. It didn't hurt that. And then I hit another rogue wave west of Cedar Keys in 1960. Beautiful, calm night, slick calm. And all of a sudden the bow of the boat raised a little, went down, and then I reached over and grabbed the bulkhead because I'd walked back to the galley and walking forward. And it stood up on end and crashed down. It was a new boat, a year old or so. It didn't hurt it. Scared us, didn't hurt a thing. But the anchor, the 150-pound anchor that was on the bow, when we got settled back down after this one giant wave went by, I walked up on the bow and I said, we lost our anchor. And then I got to looking. The anchor rope went aft and it went over the short outriggers it had next to the mast, over the outriggers, and was laying on the back deck. And so we stood right up on end in that one. But it had to, the ground had to have shifted close to us, ahead of us, because I never heard of it getting to the Gulf beaches or anything down here. It ran down. The water was only about 60 feet deep where we were, so it flattened out in a hurry. But
What about hurricanes? You ever?
yes, I got caught in one.
Yeah.
And got into Freeport, Texas finally. And ran into a boat that night, asked him where he was out of Freeport. I'd never been into Freeport. And I remember the name of the boat was the Vampire. So anyway, we got into Freeport. The jetties the lights on the jetties had already washed away, and the buoys, and the Coast Guard said the channel was closed, but we wanted to get out of the hurricane, so he knew how to get in because he was a local fellow. We went right on in.
Have you ever built a sailboat?
Well, sailboat, the first one I built, or my dad and I built it together. I hewed the stem out on New Year's Day, 1949, when I was a senior in high school. And we went fishing with it in June of 49. And we built it for a grouper snapper boat. It's a sailboat, and I sailed that boat from Apalachicola to Tortugas, back and forth fishing and all around. And that was a 42 by 15 catch rig boat. The only other big sailboat I've built is the one I've got now, which is 80 feet long, 21 feet wide, and heavy built steel hull, mainly half-inch plate, and real super strong big boat, double ender.
What did you build some of the boats for?
Built a 55-footer strictly as a micro boat because I wanted a fast boat and big enough to carry a load. Next to the last day I fished it, we caught 60,000 pounds and put on it, brought to the dock.
Wow.
And the 115-footer I built, steel boat, I mainly built it as a mackerel, as a net boat for king fishing. But I used it for hauling divers to inspect the oil rigs in the Western Gulf. I towed barges as far as the Nicaraguan border for red lobster, and I used it for scalloping all the way to the Canadian border. And I had traps, crawfish traps, all the way down to the south end of the Bahama Banks and Quesal Bank and Cachinas Bank, Magdalena's Bank, all the banks down there. And so I've done some of all of it. I still don't own a computer.
That could be a good thing. Right?
I knew what I wanted to build, or if like when John Palmer wanted me to build that 70-footer, he asked me what I thought he needed, because I had grouper fished and snapper fished, and I told him, I said, well, a double ender is the best sea boat by far, so let's build a double ender. And We built a 70-footer, and that boat was strip planked, 2x2s, epoxy glued and stainless fastened with a heavy frame. Usually they don't put a heavy frame in. You don't have to in a strip built boat because it becomes one piece. But I put a heavy frame in it, and it was a real good boat. And he used to go to sea in hurricanes, and I told him, I said, "You're going to drown yourself." He said, "No, this boat won't come apart," and it never did. So, but it did one time. It had a 4-peak hatch that was built out of 3/4 plywood. It was about 2 feet wide, and it crushed that right in on deck. So that could have given him a fit, but it didn't. So.
Having spent all these years on the water, you must have had some close calls.
A plane that crashed next to us in the Gulf. I don't know whether I should use his name or not, but it was Cyprus, but then I don't know which one. And I jumped over and got him out of the cockpit of the plane. It had already sunk to the bottom. Pulled him up and drug him up in the boat, which you're not supposed to do, but I didn't have any choice. And he survived. Then a woman jumped off the 28th Street Bridge in Miami, and I swam out and got her. She was trying to commit suicide. Drug her in. The police talked to her and turned her loose. She walked back up and ran, jumped off the bridge again. I swam back and drug her in again, and the police took her away that time. And then another time that we could have saved the fellas, I was coming back from the Gulf of Maine, and we were probably 40 or 50 miles east of Boston, and it was just getting daylight. And one of the crew members, or myself, I don't remember, said, "There's something yellow way off out there," and I took the binoculars and looked. I said, "That looks like somebody standing there with slickers on." So we turned and ran over there, and sure enough, it was 2 men in a little skiff. It had an outboard on it, and they had left out of Boston the day before, and there was a strong west wind blowing, so they were blowing towards Europe. And of course, the Coast Guard had been hunting him, but they were hunting way inshore because they were only supposed to be 8 or 10 miles off the coast. Now they're 50 miles off the coast. They're close to it, way offshore. So we took them in tow, put them in the cabin. They were about frozen because it was cold. The water temperature was in the 40s and the wind blowing hard. And I called in and told them that we'd take them to Sandwich, Massachusetts, at the east end of the Cape Cod Canal and put them off there if they'd meet us there. So they did. So we gave them hot coffee and soup and all, warmed them up in the cabin and dropped them off there. And of course, their families were glad to see them again.
I would think so.
But they could have drifted on out so far that nobody had found them and froze to death out there. And I'd switch the radio on, beautiful day, and boats everywhere. And I heard them say that they just had a squall in Fort Myers that was 80, 90 miles an hour out of the northwest. Well, I knew there was a little front coming. So I changed course and headed kind of towards Miami. So I'd get closer to shore where it wouldn't be so rough in a squall, you know. And it hit before I got very far, and boats were hollering Mayday all over, and they were sunk. Well, we came up to a sunk outboard, got the people up on deck and started towing it. And there were boats everywhere hollering Mayday, sinking, and there was about a 40-foot sailboat upside down out in the middle there, and a ship said that he was stopped alongside, but he couldn't get up to him because there was enough sea then that he was afraid he might crush him or something. Yeah. So he said, "I'm going to lay here and watch him, but I can't help him." So, but that was another bad day, and we got those people in, and 2 or 3 other little boats got behind us where we were breaking the sea off. And so I've had quite a few different times that we could help out a little bit.
Having spent most of his life on the water, Wally Ericson has led a fascinating life fishing in the Gulf of Mexico and beyond, as well as helping shape the coastline of Pinellas County. He is a true pioneer and an asset to his community. Wally Ericson, boat builder, dredger, and legendary fisherman, the ancient mariner of Tarpon Springs. This is the second program in our Boat Builders of Pinellas County series. Thank you for watching.